I had everything: a stable marriage, a devoted husband, and a promising career, or at least that's what I thought. My name is Serafina, and I was convinced I could have more passion, more freedom, more excitement. My best friend Elowen had planted the idea in my head: why settle for one man? Love is meant to be shared. It made sense at the time. I wasn't leaving Dorian, I was just exploring. What harm could a few months of indulgence do? I expected resistance, I expected anger, I even expected begging. But Dorian, he didn't argue, he didn't yell, he didn't even flinch. He just packed his bags and walked away. I took it as silent permission. So I embraced my new life: Bastion, Cassius, secret encounters, breathless nights. Dorian would come back to me eventually, he always did. Until the moment my entire world collapsed. First, the divorce papers. Then, the whispers at work, a scandal brewing behind my back. And just when I thought I could salvage something, anything, Dorian's final calculated move tore everything away. I lost my husband, my job, my security, everything. I thought I was playing the game, but I was just another piece on the board. And Dorian, he was always 3 steps ahead. Do you want to know how it all unraveled? Listen closely, this is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about consequences. I used to believe I had everything: a stable marriage, a loving husband, a life without chaos. The kind of life most women dream of. The kind of life I was supposed to want. But over time, that life began to feel too small. Dorian and I had become predictable. He woke up at 6, made coffee, kissed my cheek as he left for work at exactly 7:30. He texted me around noon with something mundane, came home by 6, asked how my day was, and went to bed by 10. Like clockwork. At first, that dependability was comforting. Then it became suffocating. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering when we used to crave each other. When every glance held promise, when his touch set my skin ablaze. Somewhere along the way, we had lost that, and I couldn't help but wonder, was it even possible to get it back? That was when Elowen planted the idea in my head. "You're too young to be trapped like this, Serafina," she had said one evening, lounging on her couch with a glass of wine in hand. "You're beautiful, you're vibrant. Why should you settle for a marriage that bores you?" "I love Dorian," I told her. But even as I said it, I felt the hesitation creeping into my voice. "Of course you do, but love isn't a prison," she said, sipping her wine. "You should enjoy yourself while you can. No one is saying you have to leave him, just expand the possibilities." "Expand? Have an open marriage?" she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "Just for a while. No rules, no guilt, just freedom. Then, when you're ready, you can go back to the way things were. You might even find you love him more after." It was a ridiculous idea. I almost laughed. Almost. But the thought stayed with me. At first I pushed it away, but then I started noticing things differently. The way Dorian barely looked at me when he walked past, the way our conversations felt forced, how even when he touched me, it felt like muscle memory instead of desire. Had he stopped wanting me, or had we both just settled? The idea stopped feeling so ridiculous. For weeks I thought about it, letting the possibility coil around my mind like a whisper. I started making small comments, testing the waters. Monogamy isn't the only way to be happy, you know. Some couples are happier when they have a little freedom. I read an article about open marriages. Apparently, it strengthens relationships. Dorian never reacted much. He listened, nodded, changed the subject, but he never argued, and that encouraged me. So one night, I decided to stop waiting. I planned the conversation, crafting my words carefully, rehearsing them until they sounded natural. I would ease him into it, help him see that this wasn't about losing what we had, but about finding something we'd lost. At dinner, I finally spoke the words out loud. "Dorian," I said, setting down my fork, "have you ever thought about how limiting monogamy can be?" He looked up, his fork pausing midair. "What do you mean?" His voice was even, unreadable. I swallowed. "I mean, we've been together for years, and I love you, I do. But I feel like maybe we should try something different. Something that could bring us closer." Silence. His deep blue eyes held mine, but I couldn't read them. "I was thinking," I continued, "what if we open our marriage, just for a few months? We experience new things, and then we come back to each other stronger than before. More silence. This was where he was supposed to resist, to be confused, maybe even angry. But Dorian just set his knife and fork down, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and leaned back in his chair. "You want an open marriage?" he asked, his tone disturbingly calm. I nodded. I braced myself, but he didn't argue. "All right," he said. I blinked. "Wait, what?" "If that's what you want, then fine," he said, standing up, gathering his plate, walking to the sink. "Do what you want." I sat frozen, watching him, waiting for the reaction that never came. His movements were slow, deliberate, not tense, not furious, just controlled. I had expected a fight, not this eerie acceptance. As he walked past me, he paused at the edge of the room. "I'll move my things to the guest room," he said, his voice calm, distant. A chill ran through me. I should have felt victorious. This was exactly what I wanted, wasn't it? So why did I suddenly feel like I had lost something? That night, I lay awake, staring at the empty space beside me, waiting for the rush of excitement, the freedom I had fought for. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected at all. Dorian was no longer mine, and for the first time I realized I might have made a terrible mistake. At first, it felt like freedom. For the first time in years, I felt desired, untamed, unrestrained. I threw myself into my new reality, indulging in forbidden attention, secret rendezvous, whispered temptations. I wore clothes I hadn't dared to before, let myself be admired, let myself feel alive again. And the best part? Dorian didn't stop me. His reaction, or lack thereof, had left me stunned. I had expected resistance, maybe even a desperate attempt to win me back. Instead, he had simply moved to the guest room without a word of protest. Elowen, of course, thought this was proof that I had won. "See?" she had said, smirking over her wine glass. "Men don't leave women like us, Serafina. They adjust. Either he'll wake up and realize what he lost, or he'll let you have your fun. Either way, you're in control." And I had believed her. For the first few weeks, I drowned in attention. Bastion, Cassius, late-night whispers, lingering touches, illicit pleasure. Everything I had longed for but denied myself. But then something strange happened. Dorian stopped existing in my world. At first, I barely noticed. We had always been independent, and with my new distractions, it was easy to forget about him. I would come home late and find him in the living room, quietly reading, as if nothing had changed. He never asked where I had been, never reacted to the scent of unfamiliar cologne on my skin. He was polite, indifferent, distant, and that bothered me. One evening, as I was slipping on a dress, I caught sight of him in the hallway, adjusting his watch. It was the first time in weeks that he had even acknowledged me before I left. "Going out?" he asked casually, like he was asking about the weather. I hesitated. "Dinner with friends." He nodded. "Have fun." Then he walked away. No emotion, no hesitation, no care. Something inside me twisted, but I pushed it aside. Bastion and Cassius were nothing like Dorian. They were bold, reckless, exciting, exactly what I thought I needed. They chased me with hungry eyes, whispered sweet lies, made me feel wanted. But as time passed, I started seeing the cracks beneath the thrill. Bastion had a practiced way of lying to his wife, too smooth, too natural. He would text her while still tangled in my sheets, promising he was working late, with the same ease that he whispered love into my ear. Cassius had a wandering gaze, even when I was in front of him. One evening, as we sat in a dimly lit bar, I caught him flirting with the waitress, the same way he had flirted with me. For the first time, I wondered, was I really special to them, or just another conquest? I tried not to think about it, but Dorian's silence haunted me. Then, one night, everything changed. I came home late, my heels clicking softly against the floor, expecting to find Dorian asleep like always. But something felt off. The house was too still. The guest room door, normally shut, was wide open. The closet inside was empty. And then I saw it. A single note on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, my breath catching in my throat as I recognized Dorian's familiar, precise handwriting. Do as you please, and I am out of here. My stomach twisted into knots. No fight, no argument, no begging, just gone. I should have felt relieved. Instead, a deep, chilling realization settled over me. Dorian hadn't been enduring this. He had been waiting. And now he was gone. I had thought I was playing the game, controlling the board. But in that moment, standing alone in the quiet house, I realized something terrifying. I had just lost my king. I was laughing when my world collapsed. Sitting in a dimly lit restaurant, Bastian's hand resting lightly on my thigh, Cassius pouring another round of wine, Elowen whispering something conspiratorial in my ear. I felt untouchable. Then my phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen, expecting another invitation, another meaningless distraction. But what I saw made my stomach drop. A message from Dorian. Your documents have been delivered. Read them carefully. A chill ran through me. My fingers suddenly felt too stiff to move, but I forced myself to open the attachment. Divorce papers. The words blurred as I scanned through the first few lines. Irreconcilable differences, infidelity, concrete evidence attached. The restaurant noise faded into a distant hum. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight, my chest constricted as if something heavy had settled on it. This wasn't possible. He wouldn't... But of course he would. My pulse pounded so loudly I barely heard Elowen's voice. Serafina, you look like you've seen a ghost. I forced a laugh, shoving my phone into my purse, even though my entire body was screaming at me to do something. It's nothing, just work. But my hands were shaking under the table. By the time I got home, my mind was racing. I expected Dorian to be there, waiting, maybe to argue, maybe to give me a chance to fix this. But the house was empty. I stepped into the kitchen, and there it was. A neatly stacked pile of legal documents sitting on the counter, a black pen placed perfectly on top, as if he expected me to just sign it and move on. I reached for them, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. But it wasn't just the divorce. Attached was a formal complaint against me, Bastian, and Cassius at work, a violation of ethical conduct policies. I felt the blood drain from my face. No, 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 no. My hands trembled as I flipped through the documents. Detailed accounts of my affairs, time-stamped messages, screenshots, hotel receipts. Dorian had been collecting evidence this entire time. I grabbed my phone and dialed him, barely noticing that my hands were shaking. It rang twice, then voicemail. Dorian, what the hell is this? Call me back, now. I ended the call, staring at the screen, waiting for something. A message, a sign that I could stop this. But there was nothing, because Dorian was gone, and he wasn't coming back. The next day, whispers followed me down the hallway at work. I knew this feeling. I had seen it happen to other people, but never thought it would happen to me. The shift, the way people avoided eye contact, the way conversations stopped the second I walked past. By noon, I was called into HR. I walked in, my legs heavy, my stomach churning. Bastian and Cassius were already there. They looked like corpses, their faces pale, their eyes darting around the room like trapped animals. Across from us sat Olivia Carter, our department head, her expression unreadable. Serafina, she said smoothly, folding her hands on the desk. Please, have a seat. I swallowed hard and sat. I assume you know why you're here. I couldn't speak. Olivia slid a file across the table. We received an anonymous report outlining inappropriate relationships between you, Bastian, and Cassius, all of whom hold managerial positions in this firm. My stomach dropped. Normally, we wouldn't involve ourselves in personal matters, she continued. However, given that all three of you engaged in extramarital affairs and that this behavior violates the company's professional conduct policy, we've launched an internal review. Cassius exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. Bastian leaned forward, his voice edged with panic. This is absurd. You can't fire us over personal relationships. Olivia raised a brow. No, but we can investigate whether any company resources were used during these interactions, emails, business trips, client meetings. Bastian paled. Cassius clenched his fists. I sat frozen. Dorian. Dorian did this. He hadn't just left me, he was destroying me. By the time I left the meeting, my entire world was crumbling. I needed answers. I needed someone to tell me this wasn't real. I called Elowen. "Babe, I can't talk right now." "He filed for divorce," I cut her off. "And he sent a complaint to my company. They're investigating me, Bastian, and Cassius." Silence. Then, "What?" "I just left HR. They have proof, Elowen. Emails, receipts, messages. He had everything." Her breath hitched. "What kind of proof?" "I don't know. But if he's done this much already, do you really think he's going to stop?" A long silence. Then, in a voice far less confident than usual, Elowen whispered, "Serafina, what if he comes after me next?" I hadn't even considered that, but as I stared down at the email now sitting in my inbox, evidence attached, I realized something chilling. Dorian wasn't just divorcing me, he was burning everything down, and he was just getting started. I thought I still had time. Even after receiving the divorce papers, even after realizing Dorian was dismantling my life, piece by piece, I still believed there was something left to salvage. Maybe I could talk to him, maybe I could explain, maybe, just maybe, I could turn this around. But when the first blow landed, I finally understood. There was no stopping it. It started with Bastian's wife. Elaine had always been quiet, the type of woman who never drew attention to herself. I never thought about her much. But that morning, when she stormed into the office clutching a thick stack of printed screenshots, she was impossible to ignore. "You disgusting piece of trash!" The entire office froze as she slammed the papers onto Bastian's desk, her voice shaking with rage and betrayal. "How long? How long have you been lying to me?" Bastian, normally so smooth, so cocky, looked like a man who had just been dragged into the light. "Elaine, listen, this isn't—" Her slap echoed through the office. "Don't you dare tell me it's not what it looks like. I have everything. Pictures, messages, reservations for hotels we were supposed to go to together." My stomach twisted. I could feel the shift happening, the weight of dozens of eyes settling on us, the whispers beginning. And then, before I could even process the spectacle of Bastian's downfall, Cassius's wife arrived. Cassius had always been the reckless one, the type who thrived on the thrill of risk. But as soon as his wife stepped into the office, I saw something I never thought I'd see in his eyes. Pure, unfiltered terror. "I spoke to Elaine," she said, her voice dangerously low. "She sent me everything." Cassius swallowed hard. His fingers twitched as if he wanted to reach for something, steady himself. "You always thought you were untouchable, didn't you?" she continued, her voice laced with mock amusement. "You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I'd never leave." Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Consider this your official notice. I filed for divorce this morning." A gasp rippled through the office. Someone whispered, "Holy shit." Bastian and Cassius weren't just losing their wives, they were losing everything. And as I sat there, watching their worlds collapse, I knew. I was next. When HR called me in later that afternoon, I already knew what was coming. I sat across from Olivia Carter, the department head, forcing my expression to remain calm, even as my pulse thundered in my ears. "Serafina, after reviewing the complaint and the evidence provided, we have no choice but to initiate disciplinary action against you." My mouth felt dry. "You have no proof that I engaged in misconduct during work hours," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Olivia didn't even blink. "Perhaps, but given the scale of the situation and its impact on the company's reputation, we cannot ignore it." A thick silence stretched between us. "What does this mean for me?" She sighed. "You're on administrative leave while we finalize our decision, but between you and me, I'd suggest preparing for the worst." My fingers curled into fists beneath the table. Dorian had planned this too. Not just ending our marriage, not just publicly humiliating me, but tearing away the last piece of my identity. And I could feel it. I was losing. Elowen was spiraling. I had never seen her like this before. She had always been so composed, so sure of herself. But as we sat across from each other in our favorite cafe, her hands shook against her coffee cup, her normally perfect lipstick smudged at the edges. "My husband found out," she whispered. "He knows." My stomach twisted. "Dorian sent him something, didn't he?" She nodded, her movements mechanical, as if she could barely process it herself. Messages, pictures, things I don't even remember sending. He won't talk to me. He changed the locks. I sucked in a sharp breath. Elowen, you need to talk to him. Maybe you can explain. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Explain what? That I convinced you to cheat? That I helped you destroy your marriage and now mine? She shook her head, eyes hollow. There's nothing to explain. For the first time since all of this started, Elowen looked afraid. She leaned in, lowering her voice, her gaze flicking around the cafe like someone was listening. Serafina, she whispered, he's not just punishing us. He's erasing us. A chill slithered down my spine. Dorian had taken my marriage, then my lovers, then my career, and now he was coming for everything else. I gripped my coffee cup, trying to steady my hands, but for the first time since this all started, I felt it. True panic. This wasn't just revenge, this was annihilation, and I had no idea how to stop it. I thought I had already lost everything. I was wrong. I woke up that morning to an email from HR. Due to the findings of our internal investigation, we regret to inform you that your employment with us has been terminated, effective immediately. The words blurred as I read them over and over. My hands went numb, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. I knew this was coming. I had been preparing myself for the inevitable, but seeing it in writing, knowing it was final, knowing I was now officially unemployed, that hit differently. I had spent years building my career, crafting my image, climbing the corporate ladder. Now, with a single cold, impersonal email, it was gone. And Dorian had made sure I knew exactly who was responsible. I reached for my phone, hesitating for only a second before calling him. It rang twice, then voicemail. Dorian, please, just talk to me. We need to... I stopped myself, swallowing the lump in my throat. What was I even going to say? That I was sorry? That I had made a mistake? That I never expected him to do this? I ended the call and stared at the phone. No response. No reaction. Like I no longer existed to him. But I refused to believe that. So later that afternoon, I went to his office. I had no appointment. I didn't care. The receptionist recognized me immediately, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Pity, discomfort, maybe even fear. I need to see Dorian, I said, my voice tight. Tell him I just need 5 minutes. She hesitated. Then she picked up the phone. A moment later, she looked up at me, her face carefully neutral. Mr. Aldridge is unavailable. I felt my stomach twist. Then tell him I'll wait. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I'm sorry, ma'am, but he left strict instructions not to be disturbed by you. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her, not fully processing what she had just said. Not only was he refusing to see me, but he had gone out of his way to make sure I couldn't even reach him. I wasn't just his ex-wife now. I was nobody to him. I turned and walked out, feeling the weight of every step, the weight of the people watching me. I had never felt so small. When I got home, Elowen was waiting for me. She looked like a ghost of herself. Her once pristine hair was unkempt, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, her nails bitten down to the skin. She clutched a half-empty glass of wine like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Did you talk to him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. He won't see me. Elowen let out a shaky breath and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. It's over, isn't it? I didn't answer, because for the first time I knew the truth. Yes, it was over, and Dorian had made sure of it. 2 days later, my phone rang. I answered without thinking. Serafina Aldridge? Yes? This is Gina Wallace from Aldridge & Co. I'm calling to inform you that all final legal matters concerning your divorce have been settled. Mr. Aldridge has signed all necessary documents. You are no longer entitled to any financial support or assets. The words didn't register at first. Wait, what? I never agreed to that. There was a settlement agreement in place, but due to the circumstances of the divorce, Mr. Aldridge exercised his right to void the previous terms. Everything has been finalized. There is nothing left to negotiate. I couldn't speak. Have a good day, Ms. Aldridge. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. No alimony, no shared assets, no financial security. Dorian had ensured I walked away with nothing. I had assumed, no, I had expected, that I would at least have something to land on, a safety net, a backup plan. But Dorian had never intended for me to land softly, He had planned for me to crash. The final blow came when my lease was revoked. I sat across from my landlord, gripping the edge of the chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. "There's been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice dangerously thin. He shook his head. "No misunderstanding, ma'am. Your name was on the lease, but the payments came from Mr. Aldridge's account. That account is now closed. The property is no longer secured under your name." I felt my stomach drop. "You're saying I have to move out?" He hesitated. "I'm saying you have 7 days." I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came out. Dorian had thought of everything. The moment I signed those divorce papers, I had become nothing. No home, no job, no money. And the worst part? I had no one to call. The next few days passed in a haze. People I once called friends suddenly stopped responding. Calls went straight to voicemail. Messages were left unread. At first I thought it was coincidence. Then I realized. Dorian hadn't just erased me from his life. He had erased me from everyone else's too. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had lost to Dorian Aldridge, and I couldn't blame them. I had spent so much time convincing myself that I was the one in control, that I was the one choosing my path. But in the end, it had never been my game. It had been his, and I had been nothing but a pawn. I used to believe that no matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, I would always land on my feet. That I was different, untouchable. That people like me, women like me, never truly lost. But I had lost. I had lost everything. The night before I was forced to leave my apartment, I sat on the floor, surrounded by empty wine bottles and the few belongings I had left. I scrolled through my phone, my thumb hovering over the names of people who once worshipped me, envied me, wanted to be me. Not a single one of them had answered my calls. The silence was deafening. Bastian? Gone. Cassius? Disappeared. Elowyn? A shell of herself. Even she had stopped reaching out. I wasn't just alone. I was forgotten. The realization settled deep in my bones, heavier than anything I had ever felt before. On the 7th day, I locked the door to my apartment for the last time. No one was there to see me off. No friends, no colleagues, no lover. I had tried everything to salvage my life. I had sent out dozens of job applications, reached out to every possible connection, but it didn't matter. Dorian had burned every bridge before I even got there. He hadn't just left me, he had erased me. And the worst part? No one cared. I spent the next few weeks in cheap motels, counting down the last dollars in my bank account. I thought about calling Dorian. One last time. Maybe if I begged. Maybe if I explained. Maybe if I told him I was sorry. But I already knew the answer. He wouldn't pick up. He wouldn't even acknowledge me. Because to him, I didn't exist anymore. And honestly, I wasn't sure I existed anymore either. The final humiliation came when I ran out of money. I had spent my entire life believing I would always have a safety net, that if I fell, there would always be someone there to catch me. But there was no one, no job, no friends, no Dorian. I sat in a dingy cafe staring at the last $10 in my account, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. The waitress gave me a pitying look, as if she knew, as if she could see what I had once been and what I had become. And for the first time, the truth hit me with brutal, undeniable clarity. Dorian hadn't destroyed me. I had destroyed myself. I had been so arrogant, so sure of my own power, so convinced I was irreplaceable, and now I was nothing. He had simply waited for me to dig my own grave and then made sure I fell into it. Months passed. The first time I saw him again, I almost didn't recognize him. I had just stepped out of a convenience store, clutching a plastic bag filled with cheap groceries and a bottle of wine I couldn't really afford. And then, across the street, Dorian. My breath caught in my throat. He looked different, sharper, stronger, happier, and he wasn't alone. A woman was beside him, beautiful, elegant, everything I used to be. She laughed at something he said, her arm brushing his as they walked, and he smiled. Not the polite, distant smile he used to give me toward the end. A real smile. The kind he hadn't given me in years. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, my fingers tightening around the plastic bag in my hand. For a split second, I let myself believe he would turn, that he would see me, that something in him would still remember who I was. But he didn't. He never even glanced in my direction. He just kept walking. And in that moment, I knew I didn't exist to him anymore. Dorian had won, completely, finally, forever. In the end, I wasn't destroyed by Dorian. I was destroyed by my own choices. I thought I could have everything without consequences, but betrayal always comes at a price. By the time I realized what I had lost, it was already too late. What do you think? Did I deserve this, or should I have had a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, follow, and stay tuned for more. See you in the next one.